Welcome, everyone. I am Sharon Green Middleton, Vice President of the City Council, representative for the 6th Council District, and chairperson for the Economic and Community Development Committee. This afternoon, the committee will hear Bill number 21-0113. In attendance, we have committee members Councilman John Bullock of the 9th District,
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councilman Mark Conway of the 4th District,
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councilman Ryan Dorsey of the 3rd District,
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councilwoman Odette Ramos of the 14th District, Councilman Robert Stokes of the 12th District,
Thank you, Madam Chair.
and checking to see if we have any council member guests. Seeing none from the council president staff, we have Nikki Thompson, Director of Legislative Affairs.
Madam Chair.
We have Lucy Font, Staff Assistant for Legislative Affairs.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And we have Matt Stegman, Director of Fiscal and Legislative Analysis.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And from the Office of the Mayor, I see Nina Thimulis, Deputy Director for Governmental Relations.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And Nina, I think you're solo today.
For the moment, thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Before we begin, I would like to remind you that if you are not speaking, please keep yourself on mute. Do not take yourself off of mute until you are recognized. When recognized, please identify yourself. Once you have finished speaking, please put yourself back on mute. And let's begin. Bill number 21-0113, zoning code modifications for the purpose of making needed changes to certain provisions that during the course of actively operating under the new zoning code were discovered to be functionally impractical or otherwise in need of modification to abate previously unanticipated consequences, specifying that certain applications under the zoning code be filled either with the Board of Municipal and Zoning Appeals or the zoning administrator, extending certain time limits for the board to act, authorizing the zoning administrator or the Board of Municipal and Zoning Appeals to deny an application under certain circumstances, modifying the outdoor seating modifications, authorizing certain reviews by the Site Plan Review Committee, authorizing that certain matters reviewed by the Site Plan Review Committee be approved by the Director of Planning, modifying certain off-street parking requirements, establishing certain exceptions to bike parking design standards, establishing certain standards for long-term bicycle standards, establishing certain rules for certain circumstances involving signs, providing for measurement methodologies for building frontages, allowing electronic signs and painted mural signs in residential districts, subject to conditional approval by the Board of Municipal and Zoning Appeals, specifying a certain time period after which the authorization for a conditional sign expires, specifying certain zoning district requirements, defining certain terms, correcting, clarifying, and conforming certain provisions, and generally relating to the zoning and land use laws of the City of Baltimore. This bill was introduced on August 16th, 2021. The bill is sponsored by the Council President on behalf of the administration and planning. And we all know that the process for making modifications to Article 32, the city zoning code, can be a monumental task. Prior to Transform Baltimore, which began in 2012, and I think I'm the only member of this committee that was a part of Transform Baltimore. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I was the only one. So the zoning code had not been modified since 1971. It took 5 years to complete the comprehensive rezoning process. Moving forward, it is my hope and imperative that future modifications and reviews of the city zoning code be performed annually in order to stay abreast of current zoning trends. As those discussed in BDC's report for the bill, we will discuss today, as well as other related activities. And, I just also want to say, keep in mind that as we go through this, and we have to have several work sessions because it's a lot of information that not only affects our individual districts, but it affects the city overall. For example, farmers markets are a really popular thing. We're going to be reviewing gas stations, parking restrictions. A lot of these things will be affecting our districts. And I think it's important that each one of the committee members, you take your time and read through these things. You have been given all of the information. You've been given the latest amendments, even down to the most recent one from Councilman Dorsey. You should have that one as well. And so I'm going to stop here a minute. Do committee members have any comments or questions before we move to the next step? Okay, hearing.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilman Dorsey.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate your introductory remarks here. I guess the only thing I would add is that there are also, I think it's important for us to recognize that beyond, as you said, recognizing current trends in zoning policy and land use policy, that, it's one thing to do these kind of practical changes that to some degree, I would say, seek to modify the zoning code to a kind of to a non-controversial extent. That there are also other trends in zoning and land use that I think would be highly, highly beneficial to the city that will also need to be putting on the table separately, that are, that we shouldn't dismiss them because they're not being presented by the planning department, right? That we have our own, that there are other things that are more difficult and that challenge convention to a much greater degree, that we will also need to see. And I just say that because that's absolutely what I intend to put on the table before long, which I expect will come to this committee. So, but I really appreciate your introductory remarks and just the need to understand that we are continually growing in our understanding, and that we are not operating outside of a world in which other cities are coming to terms with problems in zoning that have been long-standing. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your comments. I totally agree. And I do
Good morning,
also want to
everyone.
recognize
I
Nathan
am
Poole,
Councilman Robert
which is
Stokes,
also
Chair
a fiscal and
Education
legislative
Workforce
analyst
and Youth Committee.
in the council president's
I just want to
office.
acknowledge committee members
you, Madam
are
Chair.
here. Councilman Zeke Cohen from the First District.
Okay, so at this point, before we hear from the city
Councilman Cohen.
solicitor's office, and I think
He'll come
Victor
back.
Hey,
Tervala is
I'm here. Thank you, Mr.
is
Chair.
on for
Sorry,
that.
I'm
Do
in
I
a
see
mute
Victor?
issue.
Yes,
Councilwoman
Victor.
Felicia
I'm
Porter
here.
from the 10th
Before
District.
you begin, I
Thank you so
just
much, Mr.
want
Chair.
a little
Council
statement.
Vice President
So the law departments,
Milton
and
from
we
the 6th
got
District.
these reports ahead of
Thank
time,
you, Mr.
committee, and
Chair.
I just want to make a
Councilman Bullock
comment
from the
of,
9th District.
Thank
just
you, Mr.
of
Chair.
some points about
Nina
that
Demlis
report.
from the Mayor's Office.
So, I want to point out that
From
the
the
bill
President's
must
Office, we have
satisfy
Ricky
5
Thompson,
specific standards as outlined in Article 32 as they relate to text amendments. The committee must consider the following: whether the amendment is consistent with the city's comprehensive master plan. 2, whether the amendment would promote public health, safety, and welfare. Number 3, whether the amendment would correct an error or omission, clarifying existing requirements, or effect a change in policy. And 4, whether the amendment would create a nonconformity. So please keep all that in mind, committee members, as we are going through amendments. As I said, we're going to have work sessions. And so at this point, I want to start with Victor, and please, I'd like you to explain for the committee the importance of satisfying all those standards that I just mentioned. This is also, I'm looking at this because all of the other members are fairly new with this process. This is kind of like a teachable moment, and Tamara is going to be going after you, and I know she has a presentation that that's going to help explain some things as well. Victor, you're on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Vic Turbola from the City Law Department. The standards were created by you all in Article 32 when we did Transform Baltimore. And they were fairly much the standards that we had prior to Transform in 2016. So the amendments consistency with the master plan, that is, of course, because the master plan occurs every so often. And of course, everything should be consistent with the master plan when we move forward with any change in zoning regulations. Whether the amendment would promote public health, safety, and welfare, what that goes off of is that is an exercise when we make laws that promote public health, safety, and welfare. That's called police power. And all your zoning is there to enhance, basically to make life better for your residents. And that's essentially, when I look at that phrase, public health, safety, and welfare, I always sort of shortchange it and say that means if it's making life better for your residents, you are exercising your police power. And so that's what that is. Of course, your amendments have to be consistent with the intent of the code. I mean, basically the zoning code we're talking about. So that sort of stands without, we don't have to really comment about that. Whether the amendment would correct an error or omission or clarify existing requirements and change of policy. That too sort of stands on its own. And from what we are expecting is that everything in this particular bill would be an error or omission or basically a clarification or maybe a change in policy, because ultimately when you have the zoning code is basically a statement of policy. It is probably that is 90% of what that is, as well as processes and procedures. And following to the extent to which the amendment would create nonconformities, if you are creating nonconformities, that's basically something that we don't want to have. It happens, and we have special rules when we do create nonconformities, but to a large extent, we try to avoid that as much as possible. So as I said, these are standards that you all established ultimately back in 2016, and you must adhere to them in one fashion or another. My reports noted that the Planning Commission reviewed those standards and found them to be consistent with the amendments that were in this particular bill. So with that, I'll stop, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Victor. And just something else that kind of popped in. Would you say that people that submit amendments in, on any new section of the bill, that amendment has to be properly advertised isn't there a process? Well, it has to be advertised either.
If an amendment occurs in committee, it doesn't have to be advertised. And these text amendments, these don't have an impact on any specific property. Usually when we have an impact, when we have a zoning change that affects a specific property, then we're in a quasi judicial proceeding, and that requires a lot of notice. But when we're talking about a text change, that is just a typical legislative procedure. And your rules say that if you have a text change in committee, there's no advertisement, a special advertisement requirement.
Thank you for that clarification. That's very good to know as we're moving forward. Does any of the committee members have any other questions at this point based on what Victor just spoke on? Okay, moving on. Thank you, Victor. Now we have Tamara Woods, and also I see Eric Chiso planning on here. And I think Tamara has a PowerPoint, and she's going to kind of go over and start some of this 101 just to get the committee members familiar with a lot of pieces to this. She's going to give a brief presentation, and then afterwards we can begin to review each title of the bill. So we'll get through her PowerPoint, and then we'll start with Title 1 of the bill. Tamara?
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. I can do a couple of different things. I do have the PowerPoint ready to share, but going off of Vic Turvula, and he mentioned that we did go over the rezoning standards, so I can share that piece of our staff report first if you'd like to have it on the record and then go in the PowerPoint. Would you like me to do that?
Whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay, so I'll just start really quickly with kind of a traditional and then fold over. So on November 18th of 2021, the Planning Commission heard City Council Bill 21-0113 and voted to amend and approve City Council Bill 21-0113. You have before you our memo that has the staff report. In the staff report, of course, there are the amendments and one additional one that's included in the packet that came from legislative reference. Before I start the PowerPoint and kind of walk through the zoning 101 and the bill itself, let me go through the approval standards for the record that we heard at Planning Commission. And if the committee chooses to accept those, that's fine. If you have additional ones or modifications, that's fine as well. But in going through the City Council bill, we did review it in accordance to Section 508C for text amendments in the zoning code. So the first one is the amendments consistency with the city's comprehensive master plan. The comprehensive plan called for the new zoning code in this bill and intended to keep that code up to date. The zoning code is functionally part of the master plan, and we committed to trying to keep it current and reevaluate periodically. We were hoping for 1 year, but we're a little off. The amendments proposed in City Council Bill 21-0113 are based on feedback received post June 5th, 2017, when the zoning code was enacted, and other items that have arisen through the past several years. Number two, whether the amendment would promote the public health, safety, and welfare. These amendments support and improve the existing code's goal to promote the health, safety, and welfare. Examples include the expansion of farmers markets and allow for outdoor dining in neighborhood commercial establishments in residential zoning districts. In addition, the bill proposed giving the BMCA the authority to deny applications for properties with outstanding violations. Though staff is proposing to amend the bill language, see Appendix A in the staff report, this provision essentially prevents bad operators from postponing enforcement long enough that it becomes less meaningful. That is, if you can't file an appeal and ignore it just to say enforcement or try to get more approvals while not addressing the violation. So these are the types of things that are promoting the public health and the safety and the welfare. Number three, the amendment's consistency with the intent and general regulations of this code. These amendments maintain and enforce the intent of the code and reflect practical learning with real experience over time. And that goes to our goal of keeping it up based on learned modifications or things that people would like to see. Number four, whether the amendment will correct an error or omission, clarifying existing requirements, or affect a change in policy. In these amendments, correct omissions such as in the square feet per dwelling unit, these are like typos, and maker spaces being able to be established in all commercial areas. That's an example of a policy shift. Number five, the extent to which the amendments would create nonconformities. These amendments would not increase nonconformities, and in a few cases would decrease them. So those were the approval standards that we went through for Planning Commission. So we submit those for the record if you all would like to use them as well. And with that, I will share my screen and begin the PowerPoint.
So while you're doing that, just to let the committee know that the things that Tamara was reading is in the planning report packet that, was given to you early on under approval standards, and you can I think it was on it's page 4 of that, just for your record to review those again. I'm sorry, go ahead, Tamara.
Okay, no worries. So you can see the screen? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so just a quick outline, and I won't go through the slide presentation. It is rather long, as I let the vice president know last night. So I'm not going to go slide by slide, but wanted you to have it for your record. So we're going to start with the zoning overview, then a quick bill summary. I do have the planning. Oh, go ahead.
And just want to add that the committee did receive a copy of your presentation, so they had a time to look through it early on as well. Go
Okay,
ahead.
perfect. So, and then the Planning Commission amendments we have, if we need to pull them on the screen while going through the work sessions. So just to start with the zoning overview, and Vic Turbola started with this a little bit, but the code is, of course, passed by the local government regulating the size, type, structure, nature, and use of the land. It also regulates such things as off-street parking, signage, but again, we can't hammer in enough the purpose of the code is to protect the public health, welfare, and quality of life. And for those that may not be familiar, the actual code is the text, which we're talking about today, and the zoning map. So together, those actually create the code. And what you have on this page is the zoning map for the city. And of course, all the varieties of zoning districts. Basically, each district is mapped to the parcel of land. The code does not govern the public right-of-way. There are a few instances that impact the public right-of-way, such as outdoor dining, but that's very rare in the zoning code. So how does this affect me? So applying for zoning regulations is the first step in determining what's allowed to be built on the property or how it could be changed. This is extremely important when we talk about development in our city. This is literally where you start. What can you do? Where can you do it? It, outlines what are the permitted uses, some of the bulk regulations, and we're going to talk about this. But the biggest thing is it controls the use, not the user. So, and it runs with the land. So it's never about the who, it's about the what that is on the land. So the code structure, I wanted to spend a little bit of time on this because it's extremely important when we're talking about amendments to the code itself and why we're doing certain things and where we're doing them in the code. So this is literally, most people are not going to ever read the code, cover to cover because most people don't consider it interesting, but it is important. So the first thing that we're starting with is Title I, the general provisions, which are the rules of interpretation and the definitions. Title II, the purpose of applicability. Then we're at the outline of code administration, who can do what, who has the authority within the administration to do what. Development reviews, we always talk about site plan review or design review or landscape manual. Those authorities actually live within the zoning code, even though they have separate manuals associated with them. The triggers for review for site plan and design review are actually within the code. Landscape can live within the manual itself. And then Title V, this is something that I know is extremely important, and we have several amendments in this bill related to it. Our applications and authorizations dealing with variances, conditional uses, legislative authorities, notices, and use permits. This title, may seem a little bit, not user friendly for a lot of people, but we have tons of properties that go through BMZA conditional uses, so it's extremely critical for how we operate and run our city. Title VI is the zoning districts, maps, and profiles. This really sets the stage for all of the different zoning categories that we have, which actually start in Title 17 with open space in our environmental districts. Open space, it could be your parks, it could be cemeteries, but it is open space. And then we talk about floodplain in critical area, which are actually governed by legislation outside of the city, but they actually do touch how we regulate our land and how people can develop their land. So just continuing on, Title VIII, detached and semi-detached residential districts. These are our R1As through R1Es and continue on to R4. They're considered like the lower density residential districts. And I know there will be eventual changes to this title as well. Title IX, row house and multifamily residential districts. These are R5 through R10. We consider these to be the higher density residential districts. When you're getting into R9 and R10, that's when you really start seeing your 8, 10, 12 story apartment buildings that come online. It's one of the few areas that we still govern by FAR. For the most part, we have solid height requirements, but we do have a few places where FAR, floor area ratio, is still in the code. Title 10, commercial districts. For those that may have been familiar with the old code, these were B zones, these were business districts, but now they're commercial districts, C1 through C5. C5, I have that S on there because they actually have sub-districts to them. So they're multiple C5 districts, and they really relate to, the downtown core or the inner harbor or even the historic section, of downtown. So it really begins to break it down by typology in some ways within C5. Title 11 is our industrial districts. We do have regular industrial. We have industrial mixed use 1 and 2. We have maritime. This actually used to be an overlay, but now it's a district. Office, industrial, and bioscience. Title 12, special purpose districts. These are our OR, I'm sorry, I forgot the O in front of that R, but these are office residential districts, TOD, educational, hospital, transportation districts, our waterfront overlays. These are governed a little bit on, heights and different special things along the waterfront. Row house mixed use, detached mixed use, the adult use areas, in the Port Covington districts. So just continuing on, Title 14, use standards. This title is super critical. If you don't, are not really interested in reading all of the zoning code, I would actually suggest that you read through Title 14. Title 14, if you look at the tables, you'll see references to see Title 14, blah, blah, blah. And that's actually letting you know to go to this particular title because there's some additional things that you need to know about how that use will be allowed to operate within the city. And we do have some amendments proposed in this bill when we talk about outdoor dining to neighborhood commercial establishments. That's an example of something that lives in Title 14. Title 15, site development standards, measurement methodology, how do you measure certain things? exceptions, accessory structures, what does that mean, and uses, permitted encroachment. So what's allowed to go, either above the height requirement or into a yard. This is where you have permitted encroachments, and performance standards. Title 16 is off-street parking and loading. We do have several amendments in the bill related to that, and I know there'll be more to come, in the future with that as well. Title 17 signs. This is a really interesting one, and we'll spend a smidge of time on that one. We did rewrite Title 17 in 2018, so that was interesting, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Nonconformities, nonconforming uses, structures, lots, and signs, and mandatory termination of certain uses. This title also is extremely important, as we do have a lot of non-conforming uses and structures within the city. We are trying to shrink that, but we still have them. And prohibited conduct and enforcement, and then our table. So this is the structure of the code.
Madam
Just
Chair?
oh, mhm.
You mind if I ask a quick question before we move on past the titles? I noticed there's no Title 13. Is there a reason for that?
Oh, no, there's no reason other than I was probably typing really fast, so thank you. Title 13 is actually super important. That's our PUD title. So that governs our plan unit development. So thank you, Councilman Conway, for that quick catch.
Yeah, I also noticed it wasn't in the bill too, so I just wanted to make sure I asked that question in case. Thank you.
Yes, so that is our title 13. I was just moving really quickly. So that is our PUD title. And there are some changes, not directly related to the PUD title, but some in Title 17 that actually marry to the PUD title. So zoning districts, and this is super important. The details of the district actually fit their character and their purpose. And what I mean by that is, as the numbers kind of intensify, then the allowable number of uses might increase, or the intensity of the uses might increase, the heights might increase, the density may increase as we go up. So that's kind of typical. So this is really important to code structure and how you can begin to modify it, because it isn't always just about uses. It isn't always just about bulk regulations, but how do they merge and marry in order to create whatever character that's being expressed by that zoning category. So that's really important. And then also, just as a matter of course, the zoning districts are usually mapped with their boundaries being streets or alleys. In some cases, and we try not to have this, but in some cases we do have parcels that are split zoned. There are a few definitely that still exist within the city. So just to familiarize yourself with the tables themselves, I'm sure you've seen them, time and time again, but this is just an example of a typical use table that outlines what the uses are in that particular zoning category, which you'll see, what is the title, and then the categories are here. And a P means permitted. A CB is conditional by board. If you see a CO, that's conditional by ordinance. And if you don't see anything at all, that just means it's not permitted at all. And here, when I was speaking about Title 14, this is pointing you to the use standard. So this is why it's in the table, because it's extremely critical that you go back and read those. Let's see. So bulk reg. So this is really pretty interesting as well. So again, same format is that you'll see at the top the category, zoning category, and then the item that's actually being regulated is in this left-hand column. And in this case, we're talking about minimum lot areas, maximum building heights. And there are other pages. This is one page of that particular bulk reg. But it's governing your heights, your lot coverage, your lot area, the size of yards. So you have, what kind of setback do you have? Do you have 10 feet from the front yard, or is there no setback required? Maximum floor area. These are really pretty important. I'm not going to go into how you calculate, but when you say your minimum lot area, this is the factor that you use when you're dividing the size of your lot that tells you how many units you can get or how many types of that thing that you can get. So again, we're just kind of going through another example of what this could mean in the commercial zones. We saw for the residential zones, but you can see it's significantly different when we start getting into the commercial zones. You see the types of buildings that are allowed change, the densities change, maximum lot areas change, minimum building heights, and maximum building heights actually, minimum building heights start to occur where we have 20 feet. And those are really specific because we want to make sure that there's some ground floor presence. So it's not usually numbers for numbers' sake. We're trying to translate into a vision or a character, but through the law. So again, for those that may not know, when we're talking about rear yard, if this is your street and this is your frontage, then your rear yard is to the back. Your interior side yard is what's dividing between two parcels, and then your side yard is usually just your street side. And when we begin to talk about density, and I talked about lot area, minimum lot areas, all of those different things. This is how it begins to translate visually into a parcel. And in these examples, I'm just using kind of our residential zones, but easily this could begin to translate into commercial zones or other zoning categories that allow for certain building typologies. But you can begin to see what I talked about, minimum lot areas, how you can begin to divide. You know, in this case, you're only getting, you know, maybe one house. Here, you're starting to see a row house attached typology. And in this case, you're starting to see multifamily. And we took out, you know, anything dealing with FAR, even though your R10s still have a floor area ratio of 6, meaning you can do 6 times the amount of, you know, lot area that you have. So it begins to change a little bit. And this is what creates the character of development that comes into your neighborhoods. So bill summary, I'm going to talk really quickly, and for the sake of time, I won't go through all of the amendments, but I will, that we have to the bill, but I'll try to point out where we are planning to make amendments, even to what's in the bill. So a couple of things just to start off, we're adding in the ability to have small size digital signs in our residential districts, conditional to BMZA. This includes adding conditional to the board as a process to the code for signs. You're used to seeing it for uses, but it hasn't existed for signs. And I think it did previously, but we took it out in transform and now we're putting it back in. So we are adding that. And I believe that change is coming in Title I. Changes to Title IV for design review. This is because digital signs in res areas will mean, you know, maybe churches and schools that are right across the street from somebody's house, or, you know, all of these different things. So we feel that that kind of rises it to the level of conditional to the board and an extra set of eyes on design review. And Title V, I talked about Title V a lot. So we have to align the conditional use language in Title V to expand it from talking about just conditional use to saying conditional use and signs. So you'll see a lot of the amendments talk about that. Clarifying the definition of a block face to mean the full block between two streets, excluding alleys and sidewalks. Adding in the definition of frontage, one never existed. And just this note, not to be confused with tenant frontage, which comes in Title 17 and is very specific to Title 17. So, Madam Chair talked about farmers markets and adding that as a use. So it was just a popular event, you know, for many, many years within the city. So we definitely are proposing that it becomes just a permitted use in our residential categories. And in most zones, but conditional in residential. So this comes.
So yeah, I'm sorry, but you don't really have to go through this section, since we're going to be eventually going
Okay.
through the,
Okay, I can stop here if you'd like, or
you
I don't
can,
know what.
in fact, you can probably kind of wrap up your summary if you want. Because a
Oh.
lot of the regular things listed, I think from this
Mhm.
point on are going to really be talked about as when we get to those sections. Is that
Sure.
correct? Okay.
It will be. Yeah, no, I put it in
Okay.
here and I can go however you want me to go.
Okay.
So, okay. Let's see. So I can stop sharing here. And then we can proceed how you'd like.
Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and at least hear from the other agencies at this point. And so the next person after you is we have the Board of Municipal Zoning Board, and I think Kathleen Byrne is representing. So Kathleen, are you there?
I'm here.
So before you begin, I just want to say, I know throughout the year when we have reports and all, a number of things the planning department or commission really does the full-blown report. And, you guys defer to planning.
Right.
But we noticed through this whole process on the zoning code that the Board of Municipal Zoning Board is basically involved a lot.
Right.
And, I think it's important that we, that someone is consistently represented as we're going through this. And we also noticed that, the zoning and Department of Housing and Community Development with Stephanie is going to speak after you. And we noticed too that, the zoning administrator, some of their powers are going to be moved over to the Board of Municipal Zoning Board. So as we're going through this, I think it's important that it's shared, that so the committee can understand why these powers are being moved and so on, because of course, at
Sure.
the end of the day, no one wants any power taken away from them.
No,
So
and some of us don't want additional power, right?
exactly,
There's a push-pull there.
exactly.
But Jeff Veal and I were both very involved in the draft for the bill report. And I think one of the things, when you look at Transform and when Transform came through, the zoning administrator was designed to be the gatekeeper, right? So all applications for any kind of change in use flows through the zoning administrator. But like as Tamara just showed, some of the tables, for example, if you go down and you're like a daycare over so many kids in a residential zone, you can't get that approval until you go to the board for conditional use. But the way that the system is set up now is you have to go to the zoning administrator. He has to do a review, then he has to create something, then it has to come up to the BMZA. Things that we know 100% need to go to the BMZA. Why would we create that additional delay of going through the zoning administrator? When the BMZA and the zoning administrator work closely together, we can still access that system at the BMZA to create that number. It creates a greater efficiency for applicants people who know that they have to come to the BMZA 100%. So in looking at some of those things where necessarily authority taken away from the zoning administrator, the idea was that it would create efficiencies for the public who are applying and reduce kind of this funnel function, which essentially happens right now with the zoning administrator, because he is the gatekeeper for all use and occupancy applications. So, for example, if you're going to do a multifamily and it's certain conditional uses, if it's a major variance, it always has to come to the board, right? It's never going to go to the zoning administrator. So Mr. Veal, myself with Tamara, we kind of looked at some of that functionality with a critical eye to see, well, where could we speed the process up? Where does the zoning administrator not have to necessarily be involved? And so that's kind of, I think, where you see some of those changes in, I think it's Title V, where it shifts from the zoning administrator to the BMZA. So we have our own administrative staff, like we can handle, we process applications after Jeff processes applications, right? So we're just trying to eliminate problems. And I think all of you have heard from your constituents saying, why does it take so long for my application to get from the time that I drop it off, right, to get a hearing? So this was one of the things that we thought, you know what, it's a no-brainer. The code says you have to go to the board, just go to the board. And I'm working closely with DHCD on potentially a new system, hopefully in the more recent, happening more recent than and in the future, so that all of our applications will be electronic, so that we will all be able to process and move forward. Because right now the zoning application is still a paper application. You still are paying by check. So we're working on some of those things, but yeah, it wasn't necessarily designed to reduce the zoning administrator's authority and give more authority to the BMZA. It was all those changes that you see, it was to create efficiencies.
Thank you. Councilman Dorsey, your hand's raised. Do you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just curious, Katie, I mean, tell me if I'm totally off base here. It seems like this inefficiency is kind of inherent to the concept of the Board of Municipal and Zoning Appeals, right? Like somebody has to make a decision that you object to and appeal it to the board. The director has to, the zoning administrator has to deny you this thing before we can appeal it to the board. And we're kind of going, that's silly.
Right.
We shouldn't have to deny you or whatever.
Exactly. So because the code says, already tells you, you can't get your use until the board says you can get your use. But right now, the way the system is set up is people actually apply for a permit, get their permit denied by the zoning administrator, are then told, fill out this application. So you fill out this application that then goes back to the zoning administrator. So then the zoning administrator processes 2 pieces of paper for one application, and then we have to wait at the board for him to process that application, plug in the information, cash the check, and then we get the packet, right? We get it electronically and we get it in hard copy. Can you say delay, right? So that process, so it's the zoning administrator touching something twice that we already know is going to come to the BMZA. So why not just send it right to the BMZA?
So, and just that statement you just made, sometimes certain things need 2 different points of view. And I know that the zoning administrator was put in that place to kind of help with that.
Right.
I think at this point, I'd like, I guess Stephanie is representing housing. I think it's good, this is a good time for you to come into the conversation, but I do want to know, as we move forward in the future, can we actually have the zoning administrator around in part of this as well himself? I know, of course, I believe that, Katie, that you and Jeff are working together, but it would be nice to actually also have him, because there are some, it's just to help this committee and the council understand that there is that dialogue happening. We need to see that and support that as well
Sure.
as moving along. Stephanie, did you want to go ahead and chime in on your report, and then you can make some comments too with what I just said?
Sure, great. Thank you, Councilwoman, Madam Chair, and members of the committee. Stephanie Murdoch, Legislative Liaison for the Department of Housing and Community Development. We stand by our bill report in support of this zoning code modification. As Ms. Byrne already mentioned, we worked closely, our Office of the Zoning Administrator worked closely with the Department of Planning and the BMZA to identify changes and make suggestions based on their hands-on application of the code. And we appreciate the goal of keeping the code up to date. We're not opposed to any of the changes outlined in the bill, and we do believe that these changes are going to help streamline the process and provide some level of flexibility between the zoning administrator and the BMZA. So with that said, I will bring your request back to Mr. Beal to attend our future work sessions on this bill, and we stand by to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, because I just feel it's important that, you know, some of these people are present so we can get the answers right away as we're moving through our work session process. And it will, you know, if there's something standing, it won't hold up for another meeting. It's good to have, you know, all the people on deck as we move forward. So thank you for that. At this point, for the committee, are there any questions thus far to zoning or Department of Housing?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilman Dorsey.
It's not so much a question. I just want to ask at this point, since we know we're going to have multiple hearings on this, there's one particular thing that is not reflected in these changes that I'd like to try to get into here with an amendment. Some months ago, Katie, you were part of a meeting that we had Jason Hessler, Jeff Veal, and with Behavioral Health Systems of Baltimore, we met regarding the specific language that goes into that ends up online about like what the permitted use is for group homes and other things like that. And one of the kind of the takeaways for me is like we don't have a system for making sure that what ends up on that statement of what has been permitted aligns with the way we define a use in the zoning code. I'd like to get that in order here. So if Katie, if you and I, maybe Jeff and whoever else you think might be necessary, and
Right.
Councilman, have you talked to Tamara on this since she's
Tamara?
like, Tamara, I'm sorry. You might want to.
yes, Tamara was also in that meeting, right?
Right. I think. Right.
Or
So,
no, Eric Tiso was.
right.
Eric is here.
We talked about at that meeting was maybe not necessarily making changes to the zoning code. We didn't necessarily have to make changes to the zoning code. We had to make changes to the internal function.
Okay.
And we were going to change, I think, process for reasonable accommodation. We were going to change text, like the text process on the DHCD side with permits.
Okay.
And I know that there is, I think, a bill in the works to deal with group home supportive housing in another place other than in the zoning code. That makes sense.
Okay. Well, if we could just double check this, maybe if we can get together before the next hearing on this bill, I want to make sure that we're not missing an opportunity with this.
Sure.
If there's anything that we should be putting into the zoning code, I just want to make sure that moving forward, that what my constituents see when they go to DHCD's website, and you know, like I do with Code Map all the time, what we're seeing as, you know, the description of what has been permitted is actually constrained to the actual legal language that the zoning code relies upon in order to define whatever use was actually permitted there. Because it's kind of
Good point.
there's just no consistency from one property to the next, one permit to the next, and it doesn't make any sense. It's based 100% on whatever some uninformed person happens to write on their application when they submit it, knowing nothing at all of the zoning code. And we just copy it, and it doesn't make any sense. So I want to just let's meet before we do another hearing here to make sure we're not missing any opportunity if we need it here. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Okay, Department of Transportation.
One other question, Madam
I'm
Chair.
sorry. Go ahead, Councilman Conway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a question. It was something actually brought to me by a constituent, and I'm not sure if they're understanding this correctly, so I'd like clarification if at all possible. In section 2-203 transition rules, it seems to suggest that it would move conditional variances from the purview of the council to the zoning board. Is that a correct interpretation?
So
So
Mary,
it sounds like you want an analysis of the title. And we can get that, and when we get to that section, if that makes sense.
Sure. Whenever we
Unless
get
you
to
can-
it. Yeah.
Unless someone can offer a brief statement about what Councilman Conway just said, but we can delve into it at that particular section.
Okay.
So, I mean, we can definitely delve into it more, but I know this particular amendment has been a concern even through Planning Commission and continues to be. But our goal is to really take it back to something that used to be, that if there is, a change to what was, has now become, a non-conforming use that was previously permitted, that those changes actually go to BMGA. Now, if for some reason, there were certain conditions that were placed in a conditional use ordinance, then that has to be changed via ordinance. So we aren't saying that everything has to be, but if it was not prescribed in the ordinance, then it can go through BMGA. So that's kind of a quick and dirty, but we can walk through when we get to that particular title, because it is, the language that you're referring to is actually in several sections.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure I totally understand it, but happy to walk through it later if that'll help me
So,
understand the pieces.
Councilman Conway, and for the committee, so I basically have a worksheet that I have that I think is going to be very helpful for the committee. I'm going to make sure that the committee gets a copy of this worksheet, because what you just mentioned, Councilman Conway, I think with having all of this in front of you, like I have page by page set, it's kind of like an Excel kind of thing. I think it's going to be helpful for the committee. So I'm going to make sure before the next work session that you all get a copy of this as well.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, we're going to go ahead and are there any other questions thus far from the committee? Oh, I do want to mention Councilman Glover is out of town, so he's excused today from this committee meeting. Department of Transportation, Liam.
Madam Chair, thank you so much. It's great to be here today. Baltimore City Department of Transportation stands by its report, which is favorable for Council Bill 21-0113. I can talk into more detail about some of the things this does from a transportation standpoint, but really it's just updating the code and kind of putting us in a direction more aligned with the goals of the agency when it comes to complete streets and promoting zero emissions vehicles, bicycles, pedestrian improvements, etc. So thank you, and look forward to having this conversation.
Thank you, Liam. Any questions as we move forward? Hearing none, the Baltimore Development Corporation. Before you begin, I think Justin Lane is representing. Hi, Justin.
Hi,
I just
Madam
want
Vice
to make a
President.
statement that your report was a very good report, and it basically discusses proposed changes to the IMU, art studios, the light food processes. It was a very good report. So you can go ahead and, if you want, talk about that as well.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Justin Lane on behalf of Baltimore Development Corporation. We stand by our report. We support the passage of 21-0113. We particularly like the provisions that allow for art studio, industrial, and food processing light to be permitted in commercial districts. We think that this will be very helpful to businesses and also very helpful to business districts. We also support the closure of the IMU loophole. IMUs came about in 2017 as a result of Transform Baltimore, and they were envisioned as a buffer area between residential and industrial zones. And because of that, the provision that you know, a use other than residential or parking had to account for 60% or more of the ground floor area was avoidable by somebody who wanted to convert it to residential because it was close enough to a residential area. The changes that planning has suggested get rid of that. And so we are very supportive of that because it will enable us to attract the users that we sorely need. There's a lot of people in light manufacturing, light industrial that, you know, they need this kind of property in order to operate. And if they're all converted to residential, we won't be able to help them grow in Baltimore. So we ask for a favorable report. I'm happy to answer any questions or take them back to the agency.
Yeah, we're going to have a good discussion when we get to that point. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you.
The Parking Authority of Baltimore City.
Good afternoon, Fran Brzezinski with the Baltimore City Parking Authority. Good afternoon, Madam Chairman. Reporting on the changes to the zoning ordinance. The Parking Authority has reviewed the legislation and does not object to the changes. The portions that are most applicable to us, the parking garage regulation, as far as 50% of the first floor being active use in the commercial zones, we are supportive of. We think that's an important configuration to have them be part of the community and active, the garages, and not be blank faces. And is the regulation changing the C2 to allow an exemption on the first 3,000 square feet instead of the first 2,500 square feet? We see that as an appropriate incremental change in areas in the cities that are maybe more auto-oriented. And I'm available for questions if there are any.
Thank you. So now we're going to get back to the Planning Commission, back to Tamara, and you're on.
And you want me to just walk through the bill? Did you want me to? Okay.
Yes, we'll go through the titles,
Okay.
subtitles, the title section, pages, and if there is an amendment. And I just want to say too that, you know, as we're going through this as a committee, and so far amendments have been put in from planning. I know Councilman Dorsey has an amendment. I know that Councilwoman Ramos is working on amendments, and I'm sure they'll, as the other committee members go through, there'll probably be more amendments. And what I'm proposing to do is, as we're going through, you know, the title name in each title section, and if there is an amendment for that particular section, we could talk about that amendment and so on, but I want to save all of the actual voting on our voting day. I think just from my experience as I went through Transform Baltimore, we kind of had a format like that. And basically we had a chart and we voted on amendments that were put forth by planning. It was a chart that had all of the amendments, who was the sponsor and so on at the end. And we kind of did a voting as a packet for that particular agency or person or whatever as we move along. So you're on.
Okay, did we have a goal for how far we're trying to get? Are we just doing 1 and 2 today, or
We're just going to go through Title 1 today, And then we're gonna set up, I'll be able to sit down with, staff, Jennifer Coates to kind of map out maybe the next 1 or 2 sessions.
Okay, okay.
Or three. We'll see how we move on and how many questions come up and how many amendments will be added on.
And we have a lot of amendments to our own bills. Things
I
to pursue.
understand.
Sure. So we can get started. There were not a ton of changes to Title I, but I'm going to just start on page 3 of the bill. In our first 1-212 is the table. So I talked about adding conditional to the board for signage. So this is the amendment that actually allows that up. It sets it up. It's really a companion to several amendments that take place. So if you see what we call use symbology in the signage tables, we made them A, which means allow, ASSE only. This is what exists. Where we're adding is a CB indicates that a sign type requires conditional approval by the BMZA. So that's the very first amendment in the bill in Title I. So that's just setting the stage for the ripple effect that happens throughout the code. So I don't know if there are any questions or comments regarding that.
Any questions or comments from committee on that particular amendment and title? Moving on.
Okay, so the next one comes in 1303 of the definition. So I talked about block face. So what we're saying right now, block face means all of one side of a given street between 2 consecutive intersecting streets. What we are adding is excluding alleys, footways, and sidewalks. So this is actually going to help us when we're talking about, criteria that says from street to street or measuring points and all of those different things on a block face. We didn't actually know what that meant. And when we're doing, development review, that actually comes up. Is an alley considered part of this measurement or is it not? So this is actually just going to clarify exactly what do we mean by block face. And block face, for those that are simply visual, it could be the whole block of a row house. So that's that amendment. Any questions or?
Any questions? Is that Councilman Dorsey?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Yes.
Tamara, in this by this definition, for example, is Love Grove an alley or a street?
So that would depend on, I think, what DOT calls it as well. So some of them are streets. I don't know, Eric, if you want to chime in, we don't get into determining which is which legally. So that's the other side of the I guess issue. So if you want to chime in on that, Eric, I know you have a lot to kind of say on that.
Sure. So if it's named as a street, it would end up being counted as a street. Yes, we know that there are some, V cross section things that are made of concrete that look a lot like alleys but have names. But this amendment also came up as a response to a desire to zone a property, which I think it was a residential mixed use zone, if memory serves, that required a certain percentage of the block face. And basically they said, well, the side of my property to the back alley is by definition the block face. So this also fixes that loophole by conforming some definitions across various parts of the code.
Thank you. I just recently finished biking literally every single block of literally every single street in the whole city of Baltimore. And I was really shocked to find, as I looked at my map as I went along, the number of what anybody would think of as alleys that actually have names assigned to them. There are some that are only named still on paper. And so my next question would be like, is it an alley if it doesn't have a sign, but if we have a legal document in the plat and the record that says that it's actually a street, but it's an alley street or something, it has a name, but it is an alley.
I would actually ask if Liam, if you're still here, because I know that question has come about in a lot of different ways, and that's something we would actually have to coordinate with DOT on.
Can you repeat that, Councilman? I'd be more than happy to weigh in.
How are we going to draw a line with some consistency as to what's an alley, what's a street? There are streets that function like alleys that have no, for example, houses or businesses fronting on them for, Love Grove's a good example. And there are other areas where the same street might actually have some businesses. Morton Street's another good example. Down in Mount Vernon, Morton Street has some businesses that front on it, but you get farther north, like into Charles Village and to other neighborhoods, and there are
And
no
then
businesses.
we have paper alleys. And
Yeah, then there's paper. That's right. There's paper alleys, and some of the
paper
paper
streets.
alleys.
Well, I just
I have a lot of
alleys
those
have
in my
street
Yeah.
names to them.
Yeah, so I think some of this you do have to kind of go in on a case by case basis, and that's the God's honest truth, given how old the city is. But I'm open to having this conversation to see what our right of way division thinks about, if there are any opportunities to streamline. I will say with paper alleys, that's just a no go, and the reason being is there's several reasons really. If you're gonna be actually installing concrete in paper alleys, first of all, it's going to be extremely expensive, would likely require significant stormwater infrastructure to be built. And because the paper alleys over time have grown with vegetation, you would be significantly impacting the city's tree canopy.
We're not talking about anything that would impact the actual usage of the alley or street or whatever it is. Just trying to understand when we're talking about block faces, what constitutes as a disruption to a block face as an alley versus a street running perpendicular to a block face. I'd like to get a clear understanding of how anybody is going to make such a determination. That's all.
And just for clarity, with this amendment, they want to exclude alleys. And so I think that would be something good for you to kind of check into, Liam, as far as how transportation would be a part of that if alleys were excluded, because that's on their list to exclude.
Sure.
Okay.
We'd be more than happy to.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
Councilman Dorsey, is it okay if you just, for us new council folks, I'm trying to Google paper alleys, but I realize I have some experts here in the room. Can you explain what a paper alley is and how it comes to be?
A paper alley is where at some point in the city's history, the land records, if you go to the plats, which you can link through CodeMap, where the land records actually show that it's public right of way, like an alley. It's typically an alley, but where it was never paved with concrete or any other hard surface. So it's not really accessible to cars. You find these in some cases in the rear of properties between houses facing out to different streets, but where it's just grass, and occasionally there's a utilities right of way in the paper alley. Occasionally there's even so for electrical utilities, occasionally there's stormwater drainage running through them. It's really a real crapshoot of what you're going to find in a paper alley. And often, one of the ways in which they come up very often is that they become overgrown, and the city says that's an alley. That's actually the adjacent property owner's responsibility to maintain them. Sorry, we are not cutting back all of the, enormous amount of
me
weeds.
freezing?
So it's essentially an alley that was never paved.
I just want to add that I have a big problem with a number of paper alleys. If you go down Garrison Boulevard and the makeup of those communities, Dorchester, West Arlington, Ashburton. A lot of people, a lot of those alleys aren't cut, you know, with because they're grass and dumping happens, so there's no lighting. It's, they've become a real problem with the city, especially if you're dealing with a community that doesn't have a strong community association. It's, it can be a problem. A lot of, drug activity, sex trafficking. I mean, they're problems. Does that help clarify? So I guess a request would be for Liam just to kind of, I guess at our next meeting, we can go back and just really get some information of if this would be a problem. You know, planning wants to basically take the alleys out, and we have so many different kind of alleys. Do we have to specify which alleys we want to take out? I think there needs to be more information, as I think Councilman Dorsey was also alluding to. Any more questions with that piece?
Madam Chair, if I can, and I
Oh.
apologize, I wasn't as active in the committee initially. I was testifying on a bill in Annapolis in quotes, so I apologize.
Understand, go ahead.
I have a question about this. This actually came up when I was working through an amendment on the outdoor dining, because we were talking about what an alley street would be. And then I was told, well, there's no definition of an alley street, right? So this goes exactly to kind of, can we, as part of this process, really define, you know, what we're talking about by alley street, alley, paper alley, you know, all of that might be very helpful for so many people. So just wanted to chime in there. Thank you.
Good point. So Liam, do you understand our ask?
Yeah, and I think I'm
We
gonna
need some good definitions of the different kinds of alleys, seems to be the number one thing here.
sure, and I will follow up with MOGR and Councilman Dorsey, and we can talk to planning. I did just want to throw this out there because outdoor dining came up, but similar to the new policies we have kind of introduced within the past month or so, we do have our policy team working on a new outdoor dining policy. So we expect that to be dropping, you know, in another month or so. So just be on the lookout for that. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to reiterate, Councilwoman Ramos, since you came on, I did mention that, you know, we're going to be going through all of Title I today. And as we go through these titles with our work sessions, we're not going to vote on amendments. We're going to put them together at the end and kind of go over them in sync as we and vote that way, but they're going to be explained in succession as we go through the work group. I thought that that was a very good format in Transform Baltimore, so I think it would be a good format here as well, even though this is much smaller than Transform. But, and I also, and then I also have a zoning modification chart that Jennifer and I worked on that that would be helpful for the committee, basically for this whole modification, and it would be a good thing to follow. So I'll make sure the committee gets a copy of that as we kind of move forward as well. Okay, Tamara, are you still there?
I'm still here. Okay.
You can proceed.
Okay, so next up is farmers markets definition. So what we're proposing, as I mentioned before, is moving from just kind of an activity or special event to a use. Farmers market means a public market where producers of raw agricultural products sell their products directly to the public. At least 50% of vendors must sell agricultural food or food products. So not selling clothes and, you know, belts and, you know, whatever other things that come at farmers market. The aim there is really twofold. I think from a policy issue, going back to what Vic Turbola talked about, policy issues is getting, you know, healthy foods to our communities and access to foods in different ways. This again is a setup amendment for table amendments that come later on. So any
questions on the farmer's market piece?
Madam Chair, I'm sorry. Tamara, it's I don't know how we want to do this. I mean, if we're talking about a thing like this, I'm going to be curious about what the table says. We're going to go through a bunch of uses here, and it seems to me like it makes a lot of sense if we're going to talk about a use and its definition and the impacts of creating a definition for a use, then that's a reasonable time to talk about where it appears in tables as permitted and conditional and such.
Okay.
Does that make sense, Madam Chair?
Yes, it does.
Thank you.
Okay.
And,
So
I had a question about this too. Do we have, we're putting a definition for farmer's market, but is it gonna appear only in like R6, R7s, C1s? You know, where are we putting this in terms of a category?
So that was what Dorsey was just asking about, where in the tables. So that's what I'll go over that really quickly. And so the tables actually tell you what category they'll go in. So the first table amendment associated with the definition is coming in 7202, which is the open space district. So in our open
What page
space,
is the table on? I'm sorry.
oh, go ahead. Page 52.
Thank you.
So that's where all the tables start on the bill, page 52. So that particular amendment has farmers market being added as conditional to the board. And then we have use standards in 14.3.12. And so that'll be all new too, but we'll go through that in a second. So then it is also appearing in table 8301, which is R1A through R4 as conditional to the board. And that's the same use standards. In row house and multifamily residential districts, table 9301, it's conditional to the board, R5 through R10. And so in C1 through C5, it becomes permitted, and that's on page 55 of the bill, same use standards. And make sure. So then we see it again, page 56 of the bill in our industrial districts. It is coming in office, industrial, bioscience, and IMU1 as permitted. And moving forward, page 57 of the bill in our OR districts, office residential, it is conditional to the board. So that would be OR1 and OR2. And in our TOD districts, table 12.4.202, in all TOD districts 1 through 4, it becomes a permitted use. Same use standards apply. Educational campus zones in EC1 and EC2, it will be permitted. Permitted in hospital districts. And that is it.
And one other question about this. This is an atypical use in that it's a kind of an infrequent or periodic use of a space that has some other primary use in a way. Is there any kind of, I know that there's some use standards in Title 14. Is there anything in there that, about like what overlapping uses can or cannot exist? It's just an odd question. I thought it's such an odd thing to have permitted as a land use.
Yes. So it does the first part of 14.3.12.1. It's on page 21 of the bill. It means a market in a fixed location in which 3 or more vendors offer for sale to the public, and then it lists what they have is the fresh fruits and vegetables, herbs, baked goods, meats, dairy, Arts and crafts are allowed as well, but the definition, by definition, at least 50% needs to be agricultural or food. Where allowed, farmers markets are allowed in any zoning district on a lot or contiguous lots of at least 3,500 square feet. So it's setting the size. And I'm sure this doesn't say that you can't have temporary pop-up ones, but these are for the ones that are going to be permanent. Application for an initial application, the farmers market manager shall submit a site plan that shows the location of the market, the layout of the market, and all parking, including all proposed ingresses and egresses. And then the last one that we have in there is on arts and crafts limitation. Sales of arts and crafts may not occupy more than 25% of the overall sales of the market. So those are the use standards.
Thank you. I appreciate your help clarifying this. I'm still a little curious. I don't know where, do we have somebody that's trying to establish a permanent farmers market somewhere in the city, a location that would necessitate the use of this definition?
I don't know that we have any new ones, so I know we have, of course, the public farmers markets that are there, but I don't know of any, new ones, but that's just me. But I also didn't write this.
Those public farmers.
Yes, I want to say yes to that, Councilman. I know that there's plans in my district, and there's also plans as they're revitalizing the Pimlico racetrack in the grounds, and as they're making.
But what this sounds like is this is limited to when basically you're taking up the land with this market use, and that land is being used for nothing else. So like this is not applicable to like the Waverly Farmers Market, because that's a parking lot 6.5 days out of the rest of the week.
It just simply becomes a primary use. I mean, it's no different than any other, I would say property that has more than one use on the site. It's just saying in terms of the standards that you need at least be on a lot of at least 3,500 square feet. That's not saying that you can't have other things on that lot as a primary use. That's no different than what takes place now in the zoning code. You can have, multiple uses. That's like a mixed use building has multiple uses on that lot. It has residential and commercial. It's just that it has to be allowed in order for it to go as a permitted use or a conditional by board.
Thanks. The only last thought that I have on this is that for something like a parking lot, which I could see having significant kind of land use overlap with this, we have different permissions for parking lots as a principal use of a property. In some types of in some zoning districts, we have different permissions for it as a principal use versus as an accessory use. And I wonder how allowing farmers market as a principal use of a property might then push parking off as an accessory use to make parking lots a more accessible use, which I would consider an adverse outcome of allow. I wouldn't want to make a property where we have a more stringent standard for a parking lot to be used there. And then by allowing it to become a farmer's market, allow it to, for 1 day a week for the parking use of it for the other 6 days to then be downgraded to an accessory use and make it more easier to develop that lot into essentially a parking lot 6 days a week. That's my only concern.
Yeah, I think some of that, I know Katie and from DHCD, I think that could be a question too about permit applications. So Stephanie, maybe that's a question to even take back to Jason Hessler. And how you actually document what is primary versus what is accessory on your use permit applications, because that isn't something that hasn't come up before with other uses. But I think in terms of parking, one of the interesting things that I know we're not talking about outdoor dining now, but I am just for a smidge, I'm going to talk about one of the amendments that we're proposing to the bill is where you are proposing outdoor dining on existing parking that's on your property, not right of way. We're not, right of way is DOT land. But if for some reason you are taking your required parking away, then you just have to make it whole through BMDA. But we have no control if it's like extra parking. We don't really govern that. Where we are concerned is if you're dealing with what you're required to have. But even that's actually going to change because we have changes in the bill, and I know more to come. So it really,
So I
that's
want to
the piece.
remind everyone that we're only slotted from 2 to 4. So we do want to get through Title I because we were on farmers markets and we're getting a little off track. So let's kind of just pick up where we are so we can let's at least get through all of Title I.
Okay, let me see. We're almost there. I don't think
Okay.
we're super far.
Okay.
So frontage. So we're on page 4 of the bill. So frontage means the portion of the lot's perimeter that coincides with the right-of-way line of an existing or dedicated public or private street or pedestrian way, complies with the design requirements for streets and pedestrian ways, and does not include any point or portion of the perimeter coinciding with alley, lane, or unimproved street. So this, I'll just read the comment. The term is used throughout the code and is not defined. This will codify an existing definition from the subdivision regs and will also be used to better align the zoning code with those regulations. So we talk a lot about frontage and public right-of-way versus private right-of-way and pedestrian ways when we're working with developers on their applications for development that include subdivisions. So, but we don't have a definition in the zoning code. So this truly is to help us, with developing projects and figuring those different things out. I think for us, it's pretty simple, but I don't know if others have any questions or concerns. I do think, we'll lump this into our look at, streets and alleys and, definitions of those things, because it is part of that same discussion. Okay.
And thank you. And just a reminder too, we do have public testimony to take.
Yes. Okay.
So
So fuel station. So this means any premise or structure used for the retail sale of fuel dispensed from fixed equipment into the fuel tanks of motor vehicles. Inclusions, fuel station includes. So this is replacing the definition of gas station with that of fuel station, and to reflect the electric charging stations are also fueling stations. So this is really just a name change. This isn't changing anything associated with what gas stations could or could not do, with what electric charging stations could or couldn't do. It generally is just an acknowledgement that everything's not gas.
thank you.
Okay. And so then we're on page 5. Make sure I'm not skipping anything. Page 5 of the bill. In our new, what is that? V. So we're saying C parking garage as its principal use. Oh, this is just renumbering. Wait a minute. Let me find out where our next.
We don't want to do technical today. So
No, this is all, I'm just looking at it. I'm trying to move fast at where we are.
okay.
So I think, let's see. Yeah, what you see is gas station being removed, which we went over in fuel station. Then there's more relettering that's happening. And okay, then we're moving to page 6, We're towards the end of Title I. So we're looking at government facility in line 8. We are adding in recreation indoor. So that really is just an acknowledgement that the government does own recreation centers, and they are government facilities. So for us, again, that's pretty simple clarification and addition. And then we have kennels that are next in 1308. A business or other entity where 3 or more dogs and cats 6 months old or older are maintained by a person other than their owner, and boarding is the primary or principal function of the use. So this is clarifying that they can be non-profits, which is often what animal shelters are, and that is their primary function, to board dogs that might be adopted out later. And
are we following state laws with that? Are we staying in sync with the state laws of, what is it, 5, 6, 7, 8 more of dogs?
that I don't know. We are not proposing to change the number
Okay.
of cats and dogs, so that part is staying as it is in the code already.
Okay.
So that is okay. Let me look.
Page
The
7.
last one, page 7, is our personal services establishments. Is we are adding in beauty shops is there, including microblading services. So that's getting your eyebrows tattooed. So that is pretty much it.
It is a popular thing these days.
It is super popular, and that's because of tattooing. Is a tattoo parlor is different.
I see Councilman Dorsey has your hand raised. Question?
Thank you. I don't know. I don't see DLR on here. This might just be a note for them. I don't.
There was. Yes, there is. Ben.
Hey, Councilman, this is Ben Guthorn with
There you
DLR.
are. I'm sorry. I didn't see you on there, Ben.
Yeah, he's been on the whole time.
I don't see, Ben, I don't see gas stations being struck in the commercial use table or
Okay.
fuel station being added in the commercial table. I just went there to check to see if there were any changes in the tables for that, but it would seem that wherever gas station appears in the use table for commercial or elsewhere, gas needs to be struck and replaced with fuel.
We can do another global search to make sure we fix all of those.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, we're going through text first, and then I think we go through tables as well.
And I think
just following that
that
process.
might be. So that is, I think, one of our amendments, 14.314 use tables in code, where gas station appears as in the use tables in the zoning code, changed the use name to fuel station. So we did pick that one up as one of our amendments.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thanks. We're going to now do public testimony. The committee will now take public testimony. Computer users, please use the raise hand function if you wish to testify. When called upon, please state your name. Telephone users will be unmuted. Callers will hear 2 beeps. If you do not wish to testify, please say so. If you do wish to testify, please state your name. And we're seeing if there's any hands raised. And I don't see any hands raised. Okay, no hands raised. Are there, we're checking for callers now. Caller number 2, would you like to speak? Caller number 2, would you like to speak?
No response.
All right, moving to the next.
Number 5.
Caller 5.
Yes,
Caller 5.
thank you.
Hi. Hi, we
Hi,
hear you. State your name.
Great, thank you. Madam Chair, my name is Joan Floyd, and I really appreciate the way you're organizing this. I think I hope it's gonna work out for all of us. Yeah, I wanted to draw some attention to the fuel station definition. And I have a little bit of a concern there, and I'm wondering if maybe that needs to be looked at a little bit more. I think, you know, we're obviously dealing at this point in history with what is our policy going to be with respect to, you know, gasoline and electric cars and so forth. And, you know, I was one of the ones pushing for something a little less liberal on gas stations in the last reworking of the zoning code. We didn't get very far with that, but maybe the things have changed a little bit. I'm a little concerned about this definition because it seems to me that you could possibly have someone get a new gas station in just on the basis of well, we're going to put a couple of electric charging stations, so, and then you end up getting you know, something I personally don't think we really need. That's just my view, not everybody's view, but I'm not sure we need any more gas stations in the city of Baltimore, but I'm sure we're going to be needing electric charging stations. So I'm a little concerned about the way these are being lumped together. And I just wanted to express that. I hope that there's some thought that can be put into that.
Thank you. Point well taken. And I think Tamara is writing that down as you're speaking. So, and thank you for your participation in when we did the Transform Baltimore. You were present and played a big role in a number of those changes. So thank you for that. Thank you for your testimony. Next. Caller 6.
Yes,
Caller.
this is Al Barry, Baltimore Development Work Group. We have no comments on today's discussion, but we look forward to sharing some comments on the rest of the sections and titles at further workshops.
Thank you. Your point is well taken as well. Thanks. Jasmine Barnes. That's a staff person.
Okay. Okay. That's it.
All right, no more callers. Are there any more comments or questions before we close out today from any of the committee members?
Madam Chair, I just wanted to let anyone who might be interested know, Councilwoman Clark gave me all of her notebooks from Transform. They are all here in the office. If anybody needs to refer back to what was going on during Transform, I have them. I thought it was important to
Please
keep, and
let
she
sleeping dogs
insisted that I
lie.
do so.
Point well taken. Any other comments from committee members? I want to thank you, Tamara, for your 101 presentation to, as I said, as we move along, this is a nice teachable moment for all of our new council members that didn't participate in Transform Baltimore. And this is just a nice mini session of it. So again, we will be announcing the next work session, and thank you all again for your patience and working to, we're going to send a worksheet out to the committee, and looking forward to a better Baltimore. Take care.
All right. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.